The February morning had dawned gray and cold over the English countryside, carrying the kind of damp chill that seeped into the bones and made the old stones of the Sandringham estate look even more solemn than usual. It was a historic day, though no one in the royal household could have fully grasped the magnitude of it just yet. For Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, it was simply another day of duty. Known far and wide as the hardest-working member of the royal family, she had a schedule that would exhaust people half her age, and nothing, not the weather, not personal inconvenience, and certainly not family drama, was ever allowed to get in the way of a professional commitment. At her home on the Gatcombe Park estate, Anne had risen early, as was her custom. The 73-year-old princess was a creature of habit and discipline, a product of a different era of royalty where one simply got on with things. She had checked her itinerary for the day, a visit to the James Cook University Hospital in Middlesbrough, where she would mark the 20th anniversary of the South Tees Occupational Therapy Unit. As patron of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, she took this role seriously. These were not merely walkabouts to her. They were chances to highlight the contributions of healthcare professionals who worked tirelessly away from the limelight. As she prepared, a royal protection officer briefed her on the logistics. The plan was to travel by helicopter, the most efficient way to navigate the British transport network and ensure she arrived on time. Anne listened intently, nodding her approval. Outside, however, the weather was beginning to turn. Meteorological reports coming in from the northeast were warning of adverse conditions. Fog and low cloud were settling over the routes the helicopter would need to take, and then there was a question mark over whether they could safely land at the designated site. It was the kind of operational uncertainty that Anne had dealt with hundreds of times before. While the protection team monitored the situation, Anne's thoughts were already on Middlesbrough, on the therapists she would meet, and on the patients whose lives they touched. She had no way of knowing that miles away, in London, her nephew Tom Parker Bowles was also beginning his day, so unaware of the role he would inadvertently play in the afternoon's drama. Tom, the son of Queen Camilla, led a life far removed from the structured formality of royal engagements. A respected food writer and critic, his world was one of restaurants, recipes, and reviewing. He was a private individual who, despite his stepfather being the king, preferred the quiet anonymity of the London streets. On this particular morning, he had stepped out for a simple, mundane task, walking his beloved Jack Russell Terrier, Maud. The dog was a small, scrappy thing, full of personality and weighing less than 1 stone. To Tom, she was family. He ambled down a street in Kensington, lost in thought, Maud trotting happily ahead on her lead. It was an unremarkable scene, the kind played out across the city thousands of times a day. But ahead of them, a potential disaster was waiting. Walking towards them, held by a walker who was already struggling, there was a massive dog. It was a cane corso, an Italian mastiff breed known for its power and protective instincts. The animal was a brute, easily weighing 10 stone or more, a muscular engine of pure instinct. Tom, ever cautious, saw the danger immediately. He knew his little Maud would look like prey to such a beast. He gave the animal a wide berth, trying to pass by carefully, hoping to avoid any incident. For a moment, it seemed to work. The huge dog was distracted, and Tom held his breath. But then, the mastiff's head turned. Its eyes locked onto the small white terrier. Time seemed to freeze. In the next second, all hell broke loose as the massive dog lunged, dragging its helpless handler off his feet and hurtling towards Maud with terrifying speed. The attack was sudden, violent, and utterly chaotic. One moment, Tom was walking his dog on a quiet London street. The next, he was in the middle of a life-or-death struggle. The cane corso, driven by pure predatory instinct, it had locked its sights on Maud, and there was no stopping it. The dog's walker, a man who was completely outmatched by the animal's strength, was yanked off his feet and dragged along the pavement like a rag doll, desperately clinging to the chain lead as the beast charged. Tom's instincts kicked in immediately. He couldn't just stand by and watch his little dog be killed. As the mastiff lunged, Tom tried to block its path and simultaneously scoop Maud up into his arms. But the attacking dog was simply too fast and too powerful. Within the blink of an eye, the massive jaws had clamped down on Maud's tiny torso. The sound that followed was something Tom knew he would never forget, a high-pitched, terrified shrieking from Maud, followed by a heart-rending cry of pure agony as the dog's teeth sank into her flesh. For a split second, Tom's mind went blank. Then a red mist of fury and fear descended. He launched himself directly onto the larger dog. Yet he was a food rider, not a fighter, but in that moment, he was a man possessed. He wrapped his arms around the muscular beast, trying desperately to pry its jaws open. He could feel the immense power of the animal, the vice-like grip of its locked jaw. He could smell its hot, fetid breath on his face and feel the stickiness of its saliva as his hand slipped against its muzzle. The dog's walker was still trapped underneath his own animal, his face a mask of absolute terror. A small crowd began to gather, people shouting, unsure of how to help. One elderly gentleman rushed forward and began whacking the large dog with his walking stick, trying to stun it into releasing its grip. It felt like an eternity to Tom, a desperate, savage battle on a public pavement. In reality, it was likely no more than 30 seconds. But in that time, Maud's life hung in the balance. Tom knew that if the mastiff managed to lift its head and shake Maud the way dogs shake toys, her small body would be broken. He kept fighting, his hands locked on the dog's jaws, prying with all his strength. Finally, in a last-ditch effort, he managed to kick the beast in a vulnerable spot. The shock of it caused the massive dog to loosen its grip for just a fraction of a second. It was the opening Tom needed. He wrenched Maud free and stumbled backwards, clutching the bloodied bundle to his chest. As the walker finally managed to restrain the cane corso and drag it away, Tom looked down at Maud. She was a horrifying sight. Her small body was a mess of blood, torn flesh, and fur. A gaping wound was slashed across her side, and deep, sinister puncture marks dotted her belly where the incisors had penetrated. She was breathing, but barely. Without wasting a second, Tom rushed her to the nearest emergency vet. The next few hours would be critical, and he knew she faced a long, uncertain road of multiple surgeries. The immediate crisis was over. But the fight for Maud's life had just begun. While miles away, the Princess Royal remained unaware of the drama unfolding in her step-nephew's life. As Tom Parker Bowles sat in the sterile waiting room of an emergency veterinary clinic, his hands still shaking and stained with his dog's blood, the machinery of the British royal family was grinding through a day of historic proportions. Princess Anne, the Queen's only daughter, was monitoring the weather situation with growing concern. And the reports from the northeast were not improving. If anything, the fog and low cloud were settling in thicker, making the proposed helicopter route to Middlesbrough increasingly perilous. For Anne, the decision to cancel an engagement was never taken lightly. She was infamous within palace circles for her work ethic. During the London 2012 Olympics, the chairman Sebastian Coe had once joked that she had usually opened 3 hospitals by the time the average board member showed up for a midday meeting. She saw her role not as a ceremonial figurehead, but as a working member of a national institution. To cancel was to let people down. The occupational therapists who had prepared displays, the hospital staff who had rearranged schedules, the patients who had been looking forward to meeting her. Yet safety had to come first. The royal protection officers, backed by the palace equerries, made the final call. The helicopter would not fly. A Buckingham Palace spokesperson was tasked with drafting the statement. It was brief, factual, and devoid of any hint of the other seismic events rocking the family that day. Due to adverse weather conditions preventing the helicopter from flying, the Princess Royal has had to cancel the visit today, the statement read. It was a straightforward explanation, but it masked a deeper layer of frustration for Anne. She was not a woman who appreciated being thwarted by forces beyond her control, especially on a day when her brother was making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Andrew's arrest was a stain on the family, and while Anne rarely commented on such matters publicly, the tension within the family was palpable. Meanwhile, Anne was informed of the situation involving her step-nephew's dog. The palace communication network was efficient, and news of Tom's traumatic experience filtered through. Anne, a lifelong animal lover and an accomplished equestrian who had competed in the Montreal Olympics, felt a genuine pang of sympathy. She understood the bond between human and animal. She had famously fallen from her horse, Goodwill, during the Olympics and remounted to finish the event, only to later admit she had no memory of it because the lights went out. That same stoicism, that same determination to get back up, that was what she hoped for Tom and his little dog now. The princess sent a quiet message of concern through the family network, but her focus remained on the day ahead, even if it now involved a pile of canceled plans and rescheduling paperwork. The day, which had started with such ordinary promise, was proving to be anything but ordinary for anyone bearing the Parker Bowles or Windsor name. While the veterinary team worked through the night to save Maud, Princess Anne adjusted her schedule to accommodate the weather-enforced changes. The storm surrounding the arrest of Andrew continued to rage. The arrest was a constitutional crisis of the highest order, the first time a senior royal had been arrested since Charles I in the 17th century. King Charles, Anne's brother, had been forced to issue a statement affirming that the law must take its course, a carefully worded attempt to distance the crown from the scandal while acknowledging the gravity of the situation. Anne, however, was processing the events in her own characteristically pragmatic way. She had grown up in the shadow of royal crises, from the abdication scandal that haunted her father's generation to the annus horribilis of 1992 that saw 3 of her siblings' marriages collapse. She had watched her mother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, navigate these storms with a policy of never complaining and never explaining. Andrew's situation was different, though. This was not a marital infidelity or a tax scandal. This was a criminal investigation involving allegations of misconduct in public office and links to Jeffrey Epstein, one of the most notorious sex offenders in modern history. The details emerging from the police investigation were damning. Andrew had allegedly shared confidential government documents with Epstein, including reports on Asian countries following official visits and potential investment opportunities. He had allowed Epstein's associates to accompany him on official trips and had used his position as a trade envoy to pursue his friend's interests. All of this had been conducted from his office in Buckingham Palace, surrounded by taxpayer-funded protection officers who kept detailed logs of his movements. For Anne, who had spent her entire life upholding the dignity and responsibility of the crown, the revelations were deeply troubling. She had always been the steady one, the reliable sister who never caused scandals and always showed up. She had undertaken 457 royal engagements in the past year alone, more than any other family member, while Andrew had been living in exile at the Royal Lodge, stripped of his titles. As she sat in her study at Gatcombe Park, and looking out at the rolling green fields where her horses grazed, Anne contemplated the fragility.